There we go. So I'm sure most of you know me. I am Sue Birch, I guess I'm the executive director of Nevada Now. I've got a couple of board members on here. I've got Sarah Evans, who is our director of fundraising, and I've got Laura Campbell, who is our director of action, and Shanze Aslam. I don't even remember your title anymore. Director of program coordinator, coalition builder, person I talk to at weird times of the day. That's pretty much, she's in weird times of the day because currently she's in Pakistan. So, oh, Kate, you're at the airport. Yay. Um, I'm going to do this a little differently because the topic is education and there's a lot going on, and we've got some of the best speakers I could possibly come up with today. So, without further ado, we're just going to jump right into it. Because of time and such, I've got to make sure somebody gets to the airport in a second. But I do want to let everybody know that about a month and a half ago or so, we started forming action teams under the headings of education, healthcare, justice, and city council and county commission. And a few of our members of our education team are on here today. Uh, Gina is on here. Gina Vengla, make sure Venglass. Yes, am I saying that correctly? Thank you. Debbie Nichols is here. Who am I missing? Milena DiMaggio is kind of our all-around person, although she's usually on our healthcare team. But I know she helps Shanze out a lot. Um, Kate, you're on the education team too, correct? Yes. Kate McLaughlin is on here, and I'm trying to very quickly. I don't think I missed anybody. Um, so just wanted you to be aware that they're on here. We are always open to additional members of the teams. We're so far they're just doing great and have jumped right in. Their job is to have conversations like we're going to have today, watch legislation. I know Gina's going to the Clark County event tomorrow, which we'll talk about in a second. So I think Shanze, am I turning it over to you? Yes? Yes, right on. Okay. Oh, Valerie, absolutely. We'll get you the information.
Yeah,
Oh, and Bianca's
I was
here.
about to message.
Bianca is our other organizing guru. Um, so yeah, so we're gonna start with Erica Mosca. I'm so thrilled she's here, even though she has to run to the airport. Erica is not only an assembly member, but she's the assistant majority floor leader, the chair of Legislative Operations and Elections Committee, and a member of the Education and Ways and Means Committee. And because of her membership in the Ways and Means Committee, or on the Education Committee, is why we asked her to be here. So and she has to go run to the airport. So I'm gonna turn it over to Shanze because I know she's got a couple questions for you, Erica. Thank you.
Hey, Erica. It's great to see you. I know we have some amazing guests. One of we're gonna have the same general, themes that we're gonna ask everyone, and then we do have members of the education team on, so everyone's going to maybe pitch in and ask for clarification as we go along. Erica, I'm just gonna offload some questions off the top of the dome, and you can just start where you want to. So we know, we're going to be losing funding, or we can expect to lose funding. We know that legislative session is happening. So we would love to know what are the expectations and outcomes that you are seeing in your role. And what can we expect if we lose funding? What should we be prepared for? What is your advice? What are you working on? So I know that's a lot of questions, but just take it off wherever you feel fit in your expertise, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper.
Well, thank you so much. And I like your short hair. I like that. So you got the short hair thing too. I'd say hi, everybody. We appreciate you all. Very lucky to be panelists among these amazing people, especially Chair Taylor, who I'm excited will share from the Senate perspective. But for me, it's been a really interesting session. I think the first year to the second time is a huge jump. Being on Ways and Means has been really illuminating. I was on the interim finance committee during the interim, so that was good. I could kind of at least like learn how it works. I am not on the education subcommittee, so that's important to note. I chair the Health and Human Services Subcommittee. So for me, it's been really interesting. Of course, everyone on this call knows there's an integration between education and the Health and Human Services side, and really seeing those connections have been illuminating. For me, I think there are a couple things. I think when it comes to expectations and outcomes, all of us are bracing for what could and may most likely come down from the federal government. But we really are just trying to work as usual because we have the budgets. We have the budgets for the whole state, and we still need to figure out how to do this. But we know that we are asking good questions that we kind of know anybody that has a bill that comes with funding is probably not going to really go through this session, most likely, because it's our responsibility to fund our state agencies. And as you know, education is first. And so I know it's a big discussion regarding the teacher raises being part of the per pupil funding. So that's kind of the big thing when it comes to education funding. And really just, I think all of us holding the line to make sure when we are talking about cutting, which we haven't said yet we are, but we anticipate it is most likely going to happen if it comes down from the federal government. I think you can know that all of us, at least the Democrats in the legislature, are working very hard to make sure those cuts are not necessarily happening from education, because we don't want to go backwards from what we have been working on. So that's probably like a very general answer, but that's really where we are. But if you ask that to us last session, it would have been a very different answer. So it's really very interesting to see the differences from the federal side, and everything that's happening with our revenue.
What is the chatter that you are hearing already from possibly opposition or things that they are gonna likely start cutting? I'm thinking specifically about like how do we as a community need to show up to prevent education from being cut? If you can provide some insight there.
Yeah, I think that that's a great question. And I know you've been just seeing all of your emails. I think the number one thing is you continue to be engaged. You all know this. There are some groups that are very engaged during the campaign side, but not as much during the legislative side. So I'm very grateful for you all to still have a presence. I would say it's probably education and the health and human services, because something that's really scary, hopefully you saw an article recently that if we would be, one of I think the number third state impacted if Medicare and Medicaid funding was impacted. And it's like more, I think it's a little more than half of every child in Nevada is under Medicaid. And so if those cuts happen, we know that also impacts education, because how our young people show up to learn if they don't have those resources. So I think one strategy can be, how are we talking about both things, but how HHS really is related to education, because it's really foundational. And second thing is, I would just say, and I don't know if the senator is on the education subcommittee, but learning who is part of the Ways and Means and Senate Finance subcommittee, because for us, and I didn't know this last session, all those budget recommendations come from the subcommittee first, and then they go to Ways and Means and Senate Finance, and then they go to the larger body. So I think making sure that you all know who those members are, that those members know who you are, and what you care about is going to be the most impactful, because they're round one. So then you're going to hear it in those hearings, and then you'll hear it, in the larger group. So I think being present for both, because in the HHS subcommittee, there aren't that many advocates that come out to talk about budgets. And so that's probably the number one thing I've learned this session, is just help people understand they should also not just be at the policy committee that the chair on the Senate side is running, but I'm sure she'd love to see you also on the budget side of it.
Thank you for that insight. And I forgot to make this statement before, but this is sort of like town hallish. So anyone that has a question, feel free to raise their hand, just like Sue just did. Sue, pop off.
Yeah, we've got the information on the different committees. How do we find out who's on these subcommittees? That's information that I don't think I've ever seen in Nellis or anywhere else. Even when Jerry and I took the tour of the new legislative building, the paperwork they gave us was all straight committees and nothing about these subcommittees. And
I'm gonna
how,
let Chair Taylor answer in case she's on it because I think she might be.
yeah, go ahead, Angie.
Hi everybody. Thank you for having us. It's so great to see so many people, and always wonderful to see President Smith here. Just because I see her places, she's just all over the place, as is my colleague Erica Mosca. I love it. Thank you, Linda, for being here as well. When trustees are on, that means something. So thank you. This is where you find. I'm not on the subcommittee. I'm on the Public Safety Natural Resources subcommittee, which I don't know how I can put that with education. I don't think I can. But anyway, um, this is how you find it. So if you go, it is in Nellis. If you go to Nellis, and let's say on the Senate side, if you go to Senate Finance, you click on Senate Finance, and then it's going to tell you, it'll have the subcommittees. And then you click on a subcommittee, and you'll be able to see what senators are on that subcommittee. The subcommittees are joint subcommittees. So let's say for education, for an example, you're in Nellis, you go to committees, you go to finance, then you go to education, you get the senators. Do the same thing on the assembly side. Ways and means, subcommittees, education, and then you get to the assembly. And that, like I said, the subcommittees are all joint. So you have to dig a little bit, but it's there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I've never dug that deep and never realized that it was there. So thank you for that information. Go ahead, Shanze.
Mhm.
Debbie, I know you're off of mute. Do you have any questions? Or you're just off of mute? Oh, oh, and then she muted. Okay. I know the school board.
Wait, I'm sorry, Shanze. I know Kate had some
Go ahead.
concerns about some special funding, didn't you? No, we're good? Okay.
Gina?
I appreciate everybody being here and learning what we can do to support education is really important. I don't really have any specific questions right now, though. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Just tucking in with the team. So I know one of the things that we do have school board members on the call right now, but I do wanted to ask you, we are expecting a new superintendent. Are there any things that you would like to make sure, like, that new superintendent is being mindful of when they step into that role as it, plays into legislative session?
Thanks. Were you asking me?
No, Erica.
Oh, okay.
Even me, I'm like, oh, me, I don't know. Even though I do have my bill, which we know is a crazy bill, but I try to stay out of, Clark County stuff as well. But I would say, the number one thing we ask for is just communication. And it's not even me. I think it's the more senior members who've been around longer. I think, last session they pulled in all the superintendents to talk about issues. I know that they, use that. I know that there are bills that are going to be to make sure there's more communication, but I would say from me, just from my vantage point, communication is going to be key. And I know that the trustees, especially trustees Cavazos, who's on here, that's like the number one thing they've been asking for too. So I think we're pretty aligned on that.
Amazing. And I know you have to hop off in just a little bit, so I want to ask you, what are the outcomes that you would like to see at the end of session?
That's a good question. I mean, even though we're kind of almost at the middle, it still feels like we just started, which is so interesting. I think for me, I've had a much more global view this session. Of course, my heart is in education. Not all my bills are in education this session, which is different than last time. And chairing legislative operations and elections, I've really seen the importance of making sure we have the access to the ballot box and that we keep that and that we don't, cut that in any way. And I think part of that is education of how voters in our community understand how the legislative process works. But I would say my number one outcome would probably be to just hold the line as much as we can into advance where we can, knowing that we have a very difficult federal situation that we are facing, that we, of course, don't have a governor that has the same party affiliation. So really, I think us being strong, us standing up and making sure that we talk in a way that aligns with people, right? Not like esoteric policy philosophical issues, but like people are going to lose health care. People are not going to be able to pay their bills. People are not going to be able to eat. We have to be able to talk in this way so that people get we are for them, which we are, but I think sometimes it's hard to connect, real world with up here in Carson City. So I hope that we'd be able to accomplish that.
Thank you. And last question, and this is going to go for everyone too, but in your perspective, how can we continue to advocate for DEI and keeping our schools open? There's students that are undocumented and scared. We want students to be able to learn about Black history, women's history, Indigenous history. So how can we ensure those things are protected and preserved, especially, and also talking about education and health education, how can we make sure those things are preserved?
I'm sad I'm going to miss everyone's answer to this because I think it's a really important question. But for us, I would say you got to keep electing people like you have, because we've already had the sex ed bill in the assembly to make sure it is an opt-out versus an opt-in. We have already heard assembly, and that was Assembly Member Goulding. We've had Assembly Member Gonzalez has a bill to make sure that Clark County School District Police, or school police, actually, I think statewide, can't work with ICE. I know we're going to have something similar in legislative operations and elections, which is a resolution to Congress. And so I think that we all will continue to do the work to elect people who care about what you just said, and just know that there are a lot of us up here that are championing and voting and hearing those issues. So I know on the Senate side too, I'm sure they're doing the same.
I know in the past you worked with, leaders in training, and I know one of the big things about electing those right people is making sure we find those candidates. So everyone keep that in mind when you're on these calls too, is if you see yourself saying, listen, if somebody's got to do it, I got to do it, make sure you connect with people like Erica, the senators and everyone on this call right now, because we might be, the people that have to step in. Any questions from the group for Ms. Mosca? And my last question for you before you leave is, what support do you need from us moving forward?
I love that you brought together here the people from the different vantage points. I think that's what we need to continue to do, whether it's the trustees, the state board members, the legislators. I do think that's what we need to continue to do. So I appreciate you all being a convener of that.
Thank you. Valerie, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Valerie. I'm a former educator, also a mom of 4 kids. One of my children is a child with special needs. So, with all these possible cuts coming up, like one big concern for me is not only my child and the services that may possibly get cut, but then also the other children that have those special needs. Is I know, like I'm trying to, I was out there at the protest yesterday down on the strip, and I'm just trying to do all the things, but as a parent and as somebody that's been in the classroom, it's been a really frustrating experience, and I don't know how to make sure that our voices are heard, that our children need this support, and that it could be anybody's child, it could be your neighbor's child. And so just, do you have any advice or any guidance on what else we can do to make sure these students that need these supports the most are getting them?
Well, I first thank you for your advocacy, and you are doing, believe me, you're doing a lot by having a voice, by participating. I would say, just knowing when it comes to time constraints, of course, and everything, I would say our Senate side and our Assembly side, we believe in the same thing you believe in. So really it's on the governor's side, which sometimes it's like, okay, it may not feel as impactful. But if they're not hearing from people just because we think they may not agree with us, then I think we're not pushing them. And so I would say I would spend time sharing stories, especially if we can get stories from moms who maybe align with the governor too, so they're hearing from his constituents. They are worried about this. But I think that's the side where we probably need to push more, honestly.
I really appreciate that answer. I feel like that's something we also realized was almost a missed opportunity last session, was applying direct pressure on Lombardo. Any other questions for Assemblywoman Mosca while we're here? While we have her on the call, while we have the privilege of having her on the call. Jerry, go off.
So Erica, you kind of sort of answered the question, but we're at the Horsford, did a town hall yesterday. And I mean, they're really truly concerned about the Medicaid money being cut from Nevada. That's, a huge number for us. And so you kind of addressed it, but the concern is that that money will disappear and that of course it's going to hit the state hard. And how can anything in the legislature move forward if the money disappears? Because, it's needed.
Gosh, yeah, it is. It is probably the scariest thing. If people ask me what's the scariest thing we're dealing with, is that because of how much Medicare expansion we have, which is great, Medicare, Medicaid, because we needed to support more folks. And so, I mean, it's not a popular answer, but it is true. Just like what happened in the recession and what happened in COVID, is that we had to come back for a special session, and we had to start cutting things. And none of us up here want to do that, and that will be a forced hand if we have to do that. So I think anything we can do to pressure on now the federal side, right? Even those who don't agree with us, because it's not going to be good for the governor if his president is doing that, because it's going to impact all of us. So just know we are continuing to push back on that, but that is the position we will have. That is the reality that will happen.
Thank you.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I just put my info, very available. So I appreciate everybody. So I can't be on longer, but I appreciate you all. Thank you.
We love you.
Thank
We
you
love
so
you,
much,
Erica.
Erica.
Thank you for taking the time
Thank you so much.
and get your family to the airport.
See you soon.
Shanze, we can do two things. I know Beth has a soft 5 o'clock thing, but we also have the senator here, and I want to be mindful of her time too. So do we want to go to the senator first?
Yeah, let's start with the senator, and let's start with where Erica kind of left off. Let's start with your, thoughts on funding. What do we need to do? What can we expect? What can we plan for?
I think Erica hit a lot of the key points. We talk, certainly this is the education group, so we talk a lot about how the funding cuts and the elimination of the Department of Education. Let's not forget about that part, right? And most people don't realize that is funding for our special needs population. That is the group that oversees IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That is the group, which of course they don't care about it, but that's the group that makes sure Title IX and equal rights are adhered to in the educational environment. So especially when it comes down though to the special needs population and gifted and talented, right? GT, that is a special needs population. So support for that population comes from there as well. People forget that GT is a special needs population, right? Because people can be twice special, right? They can be disabled and then still be in GT. So I think that when you start peeling the layers back, and people begin to realize the broad brush of that, I don't think Trump's gonna not dismantle the education department. Former President Reagan, he wanted to dismantle education until he found out everything that was a part of it, and so it never happened. But Trump is he's going forward no matter what on this thing, and that's just what's going to happen. So I think that we have to look at this thing broadly as legislators in the state. We get about $1.9 billion from the federal government. And there is no way we can make up $1.9 billion. And that is education, that is health and human services, that is grant funding, that is safety, public safety, that's firefighting, that's you name it, any state organization that gets any kind of money from the federal government, all of that is in jeopardy. That's 1.9 billion. So that's if there's anything that keeps me up at night, that would be it. And because we can't do too much, very much about it here, we have to wait and see what happens at the federal level. I would make sure you're reaching out, even if it's an email, to the to our federal delegation and talk about how concerned you are about it. And don't forget Congressman Amadei, right? He's pretty quiet. He's not out front. We don't see him doing very much a lot of times, but he's in the GOP meetings, and so at least he's at that table, right? So make our concerns known to someone who's at that table, right? We know that our two senators, Cortez Masto and Rosen, we know what their thinking is, but I would really make sure your voice is heard with Congressman Amadei's office, starting there. Now locally, there's got to be more of a balance. Democrats have the majority in both houses, and we have a governor, right, who's a Republican, who vetoed 75 bills last session. Some bills were bipartisan. Some bills, actually, I think there were three of them that were unanimous, right? So, but here's the difference: he's on the ballot, right? He's on the ballot, and so I believe that will likely make him more likely, right, to really tune in a little bit more to what people in the community, what voters are saying, what constituents are saying, and so on. I think he'll be a little more sensitive to that this time around, and he won't be a brand new governor. He would have been there for last time. He's brand new, right? And so that you play things a little bit differently because you really don't know very much yet. So I would be making sure that you're making your voices heard. I love what Assemblywoman Mosca said, making it heard on the governor's side, because we have to negotiate. We have to negotiate. We're here, they're there, so to speak. If you look at R's and D's, it's not always an us versus them. Don't get me wrong. But in terms of when you start thinking about it politically, we have to negotiate. We have to work with each other. Let him know where you want those negotiations to happen, to occur, where you want them to land. It's okay to do that, because it's a big issue. It is the biggest issue that we have. And put all that with the fact that in our state, we don't first of all we don't have a balanced budget, because the budget we got from the executive office was not balanced. So let's start with that, which we have to balance that. But then two, even if it's balanced, we don't have enough money. Last session we had a lot of money. It was my first session. We had a lot of money. It was wonderful. I didn't understand how special that was because it was my first session, right? I was a freshman. Well, we have money, right? But it's not like that every time. This session we have no money, right? And Assemblywoman Mosca alluded to that. So you put those two things together, having more need, the uncertainty of what's going on at the federal level, the fact that the governor's on the ballot, and so he's going to play things a little bit differently. The fact that we have a split, a divided government in terms of Republicans and Democrats, and we have no money. There's a lot of things that can happen, a lot of things on the table, a lot of unknowns, and this is more important now than even last session to really make your voices heard.
Thank you for that. I know you gave a lot of, nuggets of really important information, but one thing I kind of want to dig into that came up in our action team meeting, and it's not something that Nevada now specifically is going to hone in on because we know other groups are trying to hold accountability. But when we talk about, Nevada doesn't have funding, there was the funding that came, or not the funding, but the money from cannabis sales was intended to be used for education. And then there was no accountability to make sure that was done. Is there any light at the end of that tunnel? Is there anything that the community can do to continue holding pressure and accountability to make sure that is done that you see?
Yeah, I would say this. I'm really glad you asked that question. And what you're saying is absolutely the truth until 2021. In 2021, the funding formula changed. And that's when all those things were put in place as they were intended to do. So the funding formula, you fund education, it used to be called the Nevada Plan, which was really, really complicated. Right? I have a PhD and I never could figure it out. Right? And now we have the pupil-centered funding formula. And in that funding formula, it does a lot of things, but to just stay where we are, it counts on the cannabis money feeding directly into the education account. So that has been changed. If not, I would say yes. Let's get out there on the thing. So, but that has been changed. So that's already been corrected, and it's in law. So we don't get the opportunity. We can't say, well, no, let's not do it because it's in law. It's a statute, right? So it can't be changed without going through the process that we go through, change a law to make a law or anything like that. But there was that issue at the very beginning. You're absolutely right. Until 2021, that's when the funding formula changed, and that's when that problem was resolved. And I think part of it was legislators heard the complaints from people and the concerns of people and the questions of people like, what happened? We passed cannabis, we made it illegal because we wanted it to fund education, wanted it to fund our schools. And so they fixed that thing.
So am I hearing you correctly to say that money is getting used for education now?
Yes, it is now. As of
Okay.
2021, it is feeding directly into the education account.
Okay. And can you provide a little bit of insight on like how much is that? And then like I know there's obviously a huge deficit if the federal funding pulls out, but is there a way that we can try to like streamline that money going towards, our special education departments, our extracurriculars, the things that desperately need to be upheld?
Well, I will say I don't know off the top of my head how much comes from cannabis. It's what feeds the education account is certainly the cannabis taxes. It's all of the local taxes that used to be kept locally, general services tax, a little bit of the sales tax. It all feeds into the state education account now. The state education account, let's just make this up. Let's say that account brings in, let's just say $750 million, which that's not enough, but let's just say that, right? How that money is allocated is already in statute. And there's a way it gets allocated for the special needs population. There's a way it gets allocated for low income students. It's because it's a way that gets allocated for English language learners. And part of that, again, special needs population, gifted and talented. The formula says for so many, let's say for so many special needs students, special ed, not just special ed, those students will count like I think it's 1.3. So they get the division of 1 plus 0.3 because it costs more money to educate students that are on IEPs, right, or 504s. Same thing with English language learners. Same thing with low income people, low income students. So we can't manipulate that any different because that's already baked into the formula. But extra dollars are allocated for, again, special needs, English language learners, gifted and talented, low income students. It used to be called Victory Funds and Zoom Funds. Right now they don't use those names anymore, but the way it's divided, the indexing of it leans a little bit more in those categories, so they get extra funding, and that can't be manipulated. So that extra funding is there. It has to go to the districts. Again, it's in statute. The state can't keep it. It has to go to the district.
Thank you so much for that information. I'm going to take a pause and see if there's any questions from the audience. Perfect. Deshante. I'm going to read off Deshante's first and then we'll come back to you, Gina. So Deshante has asked in the chat. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Has there been conversation about what will need to happen to generate additional pots of money to offset shortfalls, such as implementation of state or municipality-based taxes? Is there a possibility that additional taxes in various forms may become necessary?
That's a really good question, Jashante. Yes, we've had conversations, but those conversations, honestly, all happen on the Democratic side because our governor has made it very clear he is not signing anything that creates a new tax or a new fee. So the conversation can happen all we want to, but he will veto it, right? So that part is not that's not available to us. Let's just say. So anyone who has any bill that's going through that's going through the legislature right now, you have to have the understanding that if it's a tax or even a fee increase, it will not be signed. The easiest piece, right? Just so you know, the easiest piece is property taxes don't reset. And I know Trustee Smith and probably Trustee Cavazos knows this as well. What happened when we went through that whole housing bubble back in 07, 08, remember all of that, and everybody's housing prices were going up. In the legislature, they passed a law that would kind of cap property taxes so they would go up much, much slower. right? And what they put in place is, if let's say I bought a house in 2000, and I paid $150,000 for that house, and I paid taxes on $150,000 because that's what it was. If I sell that house to Trustee Smith in 2020, that house is probably worth $700,000. But Trustee Smith is still going to pay the same tax rate I paid when I bought it for $150,000. It doesn't reset. That costs municipalities and the state hundreds of millions of dollars. And everybody knows it, but that is something that the governor has said he will not sign to make that change. To me, that is the easiest shift that can happen. There is no appetite in the legislature, or even across the state at all. There's no conversation and there's no appetite at this point anyway for developing or establishing a state income tax. That's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. As I said, the easiest fix, so to speak, would be to fix that property tax and do a reset, because it costs in property taxes the state, not the state, the cities and the counties and the state. We all share in the revenue that's generated from property taxes. So it's hurting everybody. School districts share. It would feed the education account more, right? We all suffer from that. That would be the easiest fix. And that's about the conversation that we're having. Other than that, I think no matter what the federal government does, I don't think this governor, especially because he's on the ballot, quite frankly, is going to back away from his commitment to not pass increased taxes or increased fees.
That makes a lot of sense because, as we know, with this last election, the biggest thing on a lot of people's minds, a lot of the single voter issue was, the economy. And we know a lot of people voted with their pockets. Jashante, do you have any
Uh-oh,
other
I
follow-up
lost you
or are you
somehow.
good?
Hang on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You probably don't hear me.
Okay.
I'm in
Oh,
Pakistan.
no, I got it
It's
back. No,
probably
no, I
me.
got it. No, 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 I got it back. Will you say what you said again? I'm sorry.
No, I was just asking if Jashante, you had any follow-ups to your question?
I did. And you have to excuse me. I'm from Chicago, so we have different things that feed into our education system that never was implemented here. I'm not a
Mm.
right, and we have a lot of municipalities and counties and cities that kind of feed. And so I'm just trying to understand if there are other creative ways to kind of get ahead of it. Like, has there been any discussion about, and I asked this last legislative session, not that I'm for or against, just asking, has there been any discussion around placing toll booths at the entry point of coming in and out of our state to the connecting states to generate dollars? The toll roads and different things like that not only just go to the infrastructure and upkeep of the roadways, but when that money doesn't have to be allocated to the roads and stuff and the Department of Transportation, those dollars are able to be reallocated that would have normally been going to them into other buckets such as education
Hmm.
and not
I
even to create jobs.
Right. No, I mean, you can make a good argument for it. I will say there has been absolutely no conversation about that. The only conversation about a toll road, quite frankly, is coming from the city of Sparks because they want to create a toll road and they need legislative approval. They want to create a toll road to generate some revenue because of the northern part of the city of Sparks and how it connects out to the Tahoe Reno Industrial Park and the mileage and so on and so forth. That's the only toll road that's been in conversation in the legislature. So there has not been conversation about that.
Okay, thank you. I don't have
Mhm.
anything.
All right. Thank you so
Good
much.
question.
We'll go to Gina first. Go ahead, Gina.
Right. When we're talking about the funding, when you look back in time, I think Nevada had really made a lot of leaps and bounds with the funding formula and then really upped our funding, but I think we're still low when it comes to the per pupil funding when you compare it to national averages. And I was curious from Trustee Cavazos, you've been there for through all of these changes of the funding formula. Has CCSD implemented and felt better since 2021 and 2023?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for the question. When you say feel better, try to remember that I'm a therapist. So I'm going to ask you to be a little bit more specific if you can kind of zero in so I can give you a better answer.
Does it seem like in the schools that the parents and the teachers feel some relief than they had previous years, like 2015, 2018, that
Yes.
there is more funding coming in for learning disabilities and school supplies and
Yes. And thank you, Gina, again for the question. And I've been on the board since 2017, first as an appointed member and then as an elected member. And I will say, overall, there was great relief because I think that Nevada learning plan was what, from the 1960s, something like that. So I would say that we saw an improvement as far as more student and classroom focused, funding, that we were keeping the funds closer to the kids instead of on these external contracts, consultants, other things like that, which of course, some of those things are sometimes necessary to keep our district running. But we saw more funding going more toward if, for instance, there needed to be a change in a policy that was going to give more money to our support professionals. And of course, we don't have authority, the trustees, over the operational aspects. Just, we depend on our very skilled staff to bring us the initiatives, to bring us the MOAs. But I would have to say, yes, Gina, that from going from that era to where the per pupil, it's hard for me to say, the new funding formula was put together, yes, a great deal of relief in several areas.
so I think, I mean, do you think it's fair to say then like a strategy is saying, hey, we have seen improvement the past couple years, and now with everything happening at the federal level, like really hold, like I think that's what Erica was saying, hold the line. Like we need to stay where we cannot get worse. We finally were moving the needle a little bit.
Absolutely, Gina. And again, if I can kind of just jump in there and say that with the ESSER funds expiring in several areas and different things happening, where we have to look at when we're asking for funds from the governor, the legislature, that we have to look at things that are sustainable. I would have to agree with both Senator Taylor and Assemblymember Mosca that anything that goes forward right now that's an unfunded mandate is just like it's just like a no win right now. So we have to concentrate on what's doable and really try to look at what's sustainable, especially for our most vulnerable students.
I think that's good. And if we can stay abreast of mandates or the bills that are going through that are unfunded, that are going to take a chunk out of things and make it worse, that's something that we could
Yeah, we
advocate
do.
for
We
if
are.
we do.
I think the last I looked, our government affairs team in Clark County was tracking more than 300 bills. I tried to bite off chunks of about 15 or 20 at a time, then go on to the next and try to keep track of the committee hearings. But it's tough. It really is tough. And I think that our two legislators really made it clear that we need to stay invested and engaged in whatever way we're most comfortable.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Linda, I know I want Trustee Smith to also chime in, but I do think it would be really amazing if all of our organizations that are tracking bills, if we can start, collaborating and sharing those so that and get more eyes on those things. Because when we have priority things coming up, and I know from my experiences with the legislation and everything, things just pop off at one moment. Like at some point, the volcano just kind of erupts.
Right.
And we all have to be ready. So the more eyes and the more collaboration we have, we can really be on it. Trustee Smith, I know you put some things in the chat. Did you want to share some of those thoughts out in regards to
Yeah,
what Trustee Cox was saying?
thank you so much. Yeah, and it was great to hear from Linda on that as well. So the 23 legislature was absolutely a watershed moment for us, and we're incredibly grateful for the fight that particularly the Democrats brought. So prior to 2023, just on average, Washoe County was receiving about $6,500 per student. That's the average per pupil amount, not for any additional funding for special education, gifted and talented. Thanks to the 23 legislature and specifically the Democratic majority, that per pupil amount went up to 9,300. In a minute, if you put a pin in that, I will share that we have made explosive progress happen in our education system thanks to that money. Now, full stop, absolute gratitude that the legislature did invest in education in that way. But just for level setting, $17,000 about is the average for state spending per pupil. And that's just average, not even the states that are really, shooting for the stars. But with that said, I don't want that to ever sound as if we're not incredibly grateful for the tremendous strides that were made in 2023. But it is very important as we think about Nevada's education and we naturally compare ourselves on a national level. It's very important to understand that 9,300 is fantastic, but very different than 17,000. Nonetheless, what we have been able to do with that increase is truly remarkable. And just as a little example of that, one thing that our board and district did is we eliminated all fees for advanced coursework. So that's AP, IB, which stands for International Baccalaureate, dual college credit, and all career and technical education classes. Those used to have fees of 75 to upwards of $200+ per course. We eliminated all of those. Thanks to some of that funding, we've seen an explosion in academic potential, students really exploring interests like NCTE and advanced coursework. So we're really making that money work. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation. Thank you.
So thank you so much. And we're going to come back to you. But before we wrap up, we're going to wrap up with Senator Taylor. Jerry, did you have any questions? I saw your hand up earlier.
Yeah, when Angie Taylor was talking, something came to mind. I just wanted to throw out there that we've met with Zach Conine, the treasurer, and a while back he mentioned the rainy day fund. And we'd said, back at the time we were like, it's now, but I think that was like, now it's now. So I just looked it up. It's like a $1.2 billion. And I don't know if that would be something that if we do lose the Department of Education or we do lose Medicaid, that we could talk him into dipping into that money. What do you think?
Let me get off of mute. Yeah, I think that should we lose 1.9 billion? I don't know what would be more of a rainstorm than that, right? And that's something that the legislature would have to approve. It's not up to the treasurer; it's up to the legislature because it would be changing the budget. But I think if something that devastating happens, that has to be a part of the conversation. It is, I mean, it is a very healthy rainy day fund, and the governor's budget. One of the things he could allocating even more funds to the rainy day rainy day fund in his budget. Again, the budget wasn't balanced, so I'm not sure how we're going to land with that. So it's a healthy, thank God, rainy day fund. And last session because we had such a great year coming out of COVID, such a great period coming out of COVID, we were able to build it back up because the rainy day fund, we used it during COVID. Right. So then now the fact that it's back up to almost 2 billion is great. But I think it would absolutely be considered a storm if we were to lose $1.9 billion. And that would call for a special session.
And I heard you say we can apply pressure to the governor to add more budget, allocate more towards that. So that I'm hearing a lot of pressure on Lombardo. I like it. Jerry, do you have any follow-ups?
No, but when Linda gets a chance, I wanted to see what she thought about the fact of that I've been texting with her about, but what about the Department of Education going down? And she's like, well, there's lots of problems, but that's like, I have a grandson who's autistic and Linda was the one who taught me. I didn't know, and I'm pretty informed that it was going to affect our IEP, students with IEPs and special needs and also Title I schools, that is where that money came from. And I've known that for a bit now because of Linda, but that is something that, not just because of my grandson, but because of being a person who grew up in Nevada and went to Clark County schools, I know, how important that is. So that's, what's keeping me up at night, that and Medicaid.
Yeah. We're definitely going to get to Trustee Cavazos in a minute, but I want to wrap up with Senator Taylor. I want to ask you just, final questions. What outcomes would you like to see at the end of session? And then our last question we'll get
Okay,
to afterwards.
thank you for that. Because I need to jump off as well, so that's perfect. Outcomes at this point, the biggest outcome for me has to be to figure out where we are financially, because that's the biggest thing. Really, that's kind of hanging over here, up here over our heads, right? Not only is our budget not balanced from a request standpoint, but we see what's happening at the federal level. By the time we get to Tiny Die, meaning the last day of the legislature, we'll have a clearer idea of what's going on federally. So the number one outcome for me is for us to manage that, right, in the way that we feel good about.
And then our final question is, once again, how can we continue to advocate for DEI and keep our schools open, keep our undocumented students safe, and make sure that we are keeping all of our education thorough and comprehensive, that we are not, leaving out Black history, Indigenous history, women's history? How can we make sure that is protected?
Well, and that's done at the school board level. Because here's the reality of it is, because as Democrats, when you're the majority in the legislature, you pick the chairs of every committee. That means the chairs of every committee is going to be from your party, right? So because I'm the chair of Senate Education, let's just say for an example, if someone tried to put through a bill that said we ban DEI, for an example, that bill is not even going to come up, because as a chair, I'm not going to give it a hearing. That bill's going to die. Right. So right now, even something like that has zero chance of going through the legislature. That can be a state law that overshadows all 17 school districts. And because of that, things have to be done at the district level. So that is advocating with your school boards, because they have that. At the state level, it's academic standards and so on. How those standards are achieved, so to speak, that's school board level. So it's talking to your trustees, reaching out to them, advocating in there, and saying, and here's the reality of it: DEI is not about differences; it's about everybody. Make your conversation about everybody. We just don't want to leave people behind. Just like you said, we don't want to leave parts of history out. We don't. It's about everybody, and really making the focus on that. It's including everyone. No one loses their seat at the table, but you got to scooch over. You got SOS. You got to scooch over some, because more people need to get to the table. Make that the conversation, but do that at the school board level.
Amazing. Thank you so much. If anyone else has any questions for Senator Taylor, please drop them in the chat. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate all of the insight, and we'll definitely be in touch. Sue.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
I just wanted to say thank you to Senator Taylor for making the time and rearranging her schedule for being here. And I just to the group in and of itself, we still have a couple of more important conversations, both with our trustees, and we do have our Nevada State Board of Education Representative Tricia Braxton on here that we're going to get to too. So hope everybody will hang on, because this is like really important conversation, which is why we put this all together. But thank you, Senator Taylor, very much for your time. And I know you've had a busy day.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you for what you do. This is important to have. So I'm very honored to be a part of it. Thank you.
It won't be the it won't be the last time, Senator.
I know you enough to know that, Sue.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. We're going to move over to Trustee Smith, who is up in Washoe County. I know sometimes the North and the South can feel very disconnected, but I think it's really important for us to be very actively and intentionally bringing us together. So, Trustee Smith, I just want to give the floor off to you. What are some of the biggest hurdles that you are facing right now, and how can we support? Let's just dive in.
Appreciate that. And if you don't mind, because I know we've got quite a few people on the call, and maybe Washoe is not as familiar to you as Clark, so I wanted to just take a moment and just really orient everyone around who your cousins are up in the north. So Washoe County School District is larger than the entire state of Connecticut. We have about 60,000 students whose families speak 97 languages. We are a minority majority district, so 44% of our students are Hispanic, and overall about 65% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. So we are a diverse community in tremendous need as well. So that's really the makeup of our school system, and really wanted you to know that. Like, for example, our nutrition services department, we prepare and serve 1 million meals a month, which is why feeding children and the bill by Assembly Member Baucus and Haragi is so very important to us for feeding all children. But I just wanted to take a moment to touch on that so that everyone understands like who we are up here. The largest population growing within our district are children with special education needs. A couple years ago, we had about 8,000 students of our 60,000. Now it's over 10,000, and that is continuing to grow. So for me, that's a good segue to really explain some of the challenges that we have and where we need your voice, because it's not just enough for your school board to be on it. It's not just enough to have the focus from the legislature. We need people standing up and saying, this is what is important to us. You serve us, and these are the things we need around education. So something that we've been talking about, of course, is funding, but I want to bring attention to a detail of our funding formula that is very important, and that has to do with weighted funding. So there are 4 categories of education. Okay, so you've got children that have special education needs, and so those are often known collectively as our special education students. They receive an additional fund of money for those special education needs. And then there's also weights in 3 other categories. That's gifted and talented, our English language learners, and at-risk students. And this is where we could use some advocacy. So we've got those 4 categories. Well, every district has, by state and federal law, we are required to, and not just by law, but also morally, to provide these students with the assistance that they need. However, the funding formula that was passed in 21 only allows funding for one of these 4 categories. So even if a student falls into more than one category, so they may be an English language learner who is also an at-risk student, the state only provides one additional weight. However, the district, by law and by, of course, morals, needs to provide all of those services to the student. So you may have a gifted and talented student who is also a special education student. They will only get the funding for one of those categories. The reason why that is so important is because the districts are still providing those services, but we're using our general fund in order to do that. And the general fund is the money that we use to pay teachers. It's to create a baseline of education. And I will tell you that this inadequacy in the funding, because you've got the per pupil amount, and then again, you've got the students who fall into those 4 categories. Those budget disparities are absolutely devastating our budgets. So something that Washoe County is really advocating for, and many school districts are, is we understand politically that it is difficult to raise the per pupil amount, but it should not be controversial to fund all of the weights, the categories that the children actually fall into, because it is creating a crushing situation in Washoe County. And Linda, I'm looking at you, I'm seeing you nod your head. And it is too. And so when you think about your advocacy to the governor, to the legislature, and I know the legislature's on board, but we've got the governor as well, really think about advocating for funding all the needs that each student has, because that's tremendously important. The governor has put forward a budget that is unprecedented because it was completely unbalanced, $335 million in the deficit. And he is really trying to pull money away into various forms of privatized education as well, too. And so these are really serious concerns that we have, but we need our own residents rising up and really saying what's important and encouraging them to fund kids first. What we've been able to do with that change from the 6,500 to the 93 has been incredible. We've seen remarkable academic growth. We're seeing stability with our workforce. We have a ways to go, but I assure you up here in Washoe, we are making every single penny work, and we're seeing the results of that. More than half of our schools raised a star rating in the past year. So we are seeing, no surprise, when you fund things, you're actually able to meet those needs. And so I'll just pause right there. The school meal program. Hold on one sec. I'll take a look at that. I've got my little list of bills here. I'll I'll breeze through my list of bills. I didn't know if you wanted to phase over to some questions, but thank you for giving me a moment just to kind of speak openly and orient our conversation around these things.
I definitely want you to go through those bills. So if you can provide that one in the chat right now, and then at the end, I definitely want your whole list. But I do have a follow-up question to the things that you were saying. I heard you say, we need to advocate to, shift the funding allocation. Who's in charge of that? Is that the governor who creates that, weighting it only one way?
Yeah, so he of course creates the first round of the budget, and that is not reflected in it. So I would say your advocacy would most directly go to the Education Committee on the Assembly side, the Education Committee on the Senate side, then the Education Subcommittee of Ways and Means on both sides as well too. And really encourage them to make those allocations. So, I mean, I'll just be honest with you, money is definitely an issue. Our regressive property tax system could actually fix this nearly in a snap if we had a governor willing to actually take this on. And I'm not suggesting it would be that simple, but the infusion of the revenue from a change away from our regressive property tax system would overwhelmingly address a lot of these things. But that's who you're going to really want to address. This is the education committees in both houses, the education subcommittee of both Ways and Means, but particularly the governor's office, who has signaled a disinterest in funding all the needs that a child has. And it's really important to listen for these wording changes because they say, like, oh, we provide the weights, we provide the help. What they never tell you is they only fund a max of one. And not many students only just qualify for one. And that leaves the districts out to make incredibly difficult decisions in a rapidly growing student population that deserves to have a free and fair education that meets them where they are, and pushes them and supports them in every single way. But the only way to truly do that is through funding.
I used to work with Department of Family Services, and I saw that discrepancy in that, and how much it devastated a child's life when they weren't able to get all of their needs met. I worked with at-risk students and kids that were traumatized, and it was really awful to only see one of the things that were being prioritized.
Oh, and school
Is that
lunch
the
is AB 268. So Assembly Bill 268. And I testified for that last Monday in support of it. Because we do get some federal funding. So from the Department of Education right now, Washoe County receives about 37 million. Most of that is Title I funding. So those are our schools in the most economic need. And then we receive an additional roughly $30 million for the school lunch program. But Assembly Bill 268 would help cover the difference so that all children who are not in schools that are automatically have their breakfasts and lunches covered would also be covered. And that's because there's need in every community that we have. It's really a misnomer to think that only some schools and some communities have that. Here in Washoe County, we have many, many schools that have zones that have balance in them, meaning like you have different communities of different economic ability. And because children are zoned with children that may have some additional privilege in their life, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to have lunch. Also, there is no such thing as a family that isn't really facing need, because just because their income level is above an incredibly low number. So just for reference, for free and reduced lunch, because this drives me nuts. You always hear them say every student that needs a meal is going to get one. Absolutely not. That is not true. It is true that we feed them, but their debt accrues. Just through the first half of the year, Washoe County has accrued about $50,000 in debt from families who have not been able to pay for their meals. And you have to understand what they're doing to free and reduce lunch on the federal side. They are compressing the level for the income level. So a single parent making just over $27,000, that's the limit for free and reduced lunch. So we have families who are desperately in poverty maybe making 30, 35,000, they don't actually qualify. The limits are incredibly, incredibly low. So it's so important to bring attention to those things so that when you hear free and reduced lunch for families that need it, they've been compressing those levels so that they're so desperately below poverty level that families who make just over that do not qualify. So I assure you, the way that program is run does not really benefit nearly a portion of the need that exists in our community. And that's why Assembly members Baucus and Haragi's bill is so important.
I know one of the things that came up earlier was the fact that it's probably going to be very difficult to pass things with the fiscal note. What do you suggest we do to preemptively prepare ourselves and advocate for this to be prioritized?
Well, what they're going to have to do on the education side, particularly with the governor's budget, is they're going to have to, in my opinion, pull back the money towards all privatized or nearly privatized sources. And here's what I mean with that. So here in Washoe County, we have 11 district sponsored charter schools. They're all nonprofit charter schools. They're small. They exist within the realm of when charter schools were originally created. What we're seeing right now, though, is a proliferation of for-profit charter schools that are run by private companies that are actually profiting off of education. So the state is paying for their buildings, which are private real estate. The governor is trying to fund. It's so important to note charter schools in and of themselves really have a place in our community, and they do if they adhere to the original form of what charter schools were for. I do believe in them. It is really important to point out, though, that a student that has a behavioral, mental health, a learning, developmental need, and that charter school does not offer that program, then the children typically leave that school, and where do they go? They go to their actual public education system. And so the reason why that's important is not because necessarily I'm getting into the argument of charters being good or bad, but rather everybody needs to understand that the only system of education in the state of Nevada that exists for every single student, an incarcerated student, students with every single need, is our true public education systems. And so while I respect and very much support at least our own district sponsored charters and those nonprofit charter models, they very much have a place in education, and I do support that. I am always very hesitant when we're pulling money away from the true public education systems because we really are educating every single child. So the reason why I point that out is because the governor really wants to fund transportation for charter schools and wants to invest more money with that. But I would say things like that are nice to haves down the road. And so that's why I think that there is funding available. It's just a matter of where it's being directed towards.
Thank you so much. Gina, I see your hand up.
Trustee Smith, that was great. Thank you so much for that wealth of information. Yeah, I get triggered on the charter school thing. My son was bullied out of 2 different charter schools here in Clark County. I mean, it was absolutely brutal, and CCSD was just a godsend. I mean, their special ed program, the teachers he got, I mean, I could just did really, really great. But yeah, if you ever need anybody to talk about charter schools, I'm here for you.
I appreciate that. And actually, the Gwynn report, everybody on this call, you should go to the Kenny Gwynn Center for Policy Priorities and look at their education funding report. It will be an absolute watershed moment for you to read, but something that's particularly important when you read it, and that focuses more so on elementary schools. You'll actually see the percentage of special education students that charter schools are educating, and you'll see a huge disparity in the number of students that they're educating versus the public districts that exist. So it's really important to understand that those children all have different costs associated with them. And that is why I do feel comfortable advocating for focusing on our public education systems and then realizing that we need to equitably allocate our funding based on that.
Absolutely, absolutely, because it creates like an elitist pot in those charter schools where public funding's going, and it leaves our public schools kind of struggling in the background. But yeah, they told me they don't have dyslexia support. They have no special education to help him learn to
And they
read.
don't have to. By state law, they don't have to offer anything. And if your child is diagnosed with any of those things or has behavioral issues, and they're no longer aligned or they fall out of adherence with the charter for the school, then the child needs to go to their true public education system to receive those services. And that's all perfectly legal as it stands right now, according to Nevada law.
Gina, did you have any question? For time purposes, I do want to move us along, but did you have any other questions? Okay, perfect. I want to ask Trustee Smith the last question. How can we make sure that we're advocating for our students, our most vulnerable kids? I heard you talk about the diversity that exists up in Washoe County. How can we make sure those students are protected and their fears are a little bit, I don't know if coddled is the right word, but how can we make sure that they feel safe?
Absolutely. First step is just what Senator Taylor said, and that is make sure that you have good people on your school board that are going to stand up and support these kids. And where a school board stands is exactly where you're going to actually see the protection. Like we see it up here in Northern Nevada, Douglas County, agreeing to work with ICE officials in different ways that we are not, for example, in Washoe County. So really it comes down to your school board. And then show up. Please, I am begging everybody, go to a school board meeting, send emails, say that it is important to create a welcoming environment, not like in an attacky kind of way, because hopefully your trustees want to support kids, at least in Washoe County, we certainly do. And I know Linda, Trustee Cavazos certainly does too. But amplify our voices. Say, keep going, keep doing this. This is important. I hate to be so cliche, but be the wind underneath our wings with this. Come to meetings and say that it is important. Be a face and a voice at the microphone saying this is a priority for our community. Stay with it. Please do it. And be fearless in your advocacy with that. That is what I want to see from the public at our school board meetings and with our emails. You are wanted. Your voice is needed. We do this work to serve you, and we absolutely need to hear from the community that this is a value that you want to see executed on. Not because we're not doing it, but it makes sure that it drowns out all of those other naysayers that do not want Black and brown children. They do not want underrepresented kids in these districts, and they're very open about it. So that is so helpful when you stand up and say, these are the values of our community, and we will stand behind you in supporting every single child.
Thank you so much, Trustee Smith. We really, really appreciate your time and the wealth of information that you brought to us. I hope you can stay on for at least this other question, my first question for Trustee Cavazos, because you might have some thoughts about it. But thank you so much. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Sue, you're off mute.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you to Beth. I always learn so much when she's on, and I thank everybody on here for being so patient. We know this is an important subject, and we tried to give you a whole breadth of perspectives on it. So I hope you'll stick around. And Dr. Braxton, we are getting to you soon. I promise.
All right, Trustee Cavazos, we're going to start off with a toughie. I know, Trustee Smith was talking about showing up, making sure, you've got the right people on your school board. We know we've got some Moms for Liberty people. So how do we need to deal with that? How do we move forward and make sure that we're making sure our community's values are protected and uplifted, our community, not some of the other folks that might be in our cities.
Thank you for the question. I think that Beth gave me a great segue into that, to where she's talking about people showing up and speaking their minds, emailing us, and going ahead and letting us know what they expect from us and what their priorities are. As far as anybody being part of a particular group that does not align with the overall goals of basically giving every single child in our community, in our district, any of our districts in our state, every opportunity, I try to look for and I'm not saying this is easy, but I kind of have both my school board trustee and my therapist hat on at the same time because it's almost impossible to separate sometimes. But I try to look for the commonalities, some places where we can agree. And let's be realistic. I've been very direct. Those you who know me and have watched any of the meetings know that I'm not exactly a shrinking violet at speaking up, but I have made it quite clear that when anybody in these groups or anybody else, and I try to listen to everyone, even if I know in advance that I'm not going to align with where they're coming from. I've made it quite clear that when people say to me, we need to repeal the gender diversity policy. My answer is that's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. First of all, that is a state mandate with each district responsible for, basically putting together their own policy. And the second one that comes up all the time, that one comes up constantly. But the other one that comes up all the time is the anti-racism policy. Some folks would like us to repeal that. And my answer to that is the same thing. That is not going to happen. I mean, I think I have right here, this was something having to do with DEI. We had a constituent write in and say that they noticed that our teachers and our support professionals were still required to be doing professional learning, focusing on our students' culture, identities, histories, and contributions. And this person wanted to know, when was that going to be ended because of President Trump's directives? And our answer was, and I quoted it exactly, the Clark County School District is committed to providing a safe, secure, and respectful learning environment for all students and employees. And this includes everywhere, all school facilities, buildings, buses, school grounds, activities. And when somebody comes up to me and says, we want to reverse this. We want to dismantle the Department of Education. Public education will be better if we dismantle public education. I trot out our policies and I say, this is what says that everyone matters. Every single child, special needs, ELL, gifted, every single child in our district deserves equal opportunities. And right now, I'll just tell you right now that we have an extra position. We have an additional position flying right now. It's out there in public for the Office of Equity and Diversity. And somebody asked me this morning, a media person asked me, is that true? Are you guys doing that? I said, absolutely. We are absolutely doing that. So going back to your original question, I kind of snuck in some extra stuff there. And that was that I look for the commonalities, but I make it quite clear. And many of my colleagues assist me because it has to be a team. And I know Beth will agree with me on this. It has to be collaborative. No one school member is more important than the other. It has to be a team goal, but we have to make it clear that if there is anything that is being attempted that is going to take away from the equal opportunities for our children, then it's non-negotiable. We're not going to go there because kids have to come first. Long answer to your short question.
No, thank you for your insight. Thank you for, we understand in the organizing world, there's this phrase, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. And I think that's very important when it comes to politics and anything that we're doing in this world. So finding those doors, those unlocked doors, those cracked windows, I understand the need and the necessity to do that, especially when we are already beyond an election and people are in their jobs. I would love to ask you, we are expecting a new superintendent to come in. Where do we go where do we go from here once we have that person in place? What are the things that we want to make sure that they are doing the things that they need, what are the priorities that they're going to have on their table?
Okay, thank you for that. And I'll just go ahead and throw in the schedule. I think probably everybody's seen it. There's a superintendent search link on the CCSD website. But the trustees are going to be watching very carefully tomorrow, March 10th. And that's from 5 to 8 o'clock at Rancho High School. Part of the community listening session is going to be streamed. And I think a couple of the parts with the union leaders and with the business leaders are going to be in person only. So the answers that they give to our community are then going to be communicated to us, the trustees. So when we do the final interviews on the 11th, and then we do the selection of the superintendent 2 days later on the 13th, we're going to be looking, and this is something that we've already heard from our focus groups, we're going to be looking for what is their action plan when they say that they're going to be transparent and accountable to everyone in the district. This includes all of our school communities, including the rurals. Just like Beth said, I crack up when people say, well, it's just an urban district. You know, we have a lot of rural areas in the Clark County School District and throughout the state, of course. So we're going to be looking for what is your focus? How is your communication going to be clear and equitable to all of our communities, not just to certain, shall we say, special interest groups? I'm trying to put this politely, but to everyone, so that if a parent comes up to me and says, Trustee Cavazos, where can I find the answer to this? I don't want that parent to have to go through 25 links on a web page, and not everybody has good accessibility to the internet resources. We have to make sure that the schools have the resources. But I would have to say that the transparency and the accountability, and I'm going to say there, having been there in 7 years, excuse me, a lot of sessions today, counseling sessions, but what is the action plan? What are the steps? How are we going to get measurable results? And if we don't get those measurable results, how do we discern what is working and what is not working for our children so that we can come out with better student outcomes? Because our mission statement says that we're going to prepare our kids to go out into the world. If they are not fed, if they do not have the wraparound services, if they do not have their mental health services, if they do not have their IEPs and licensed teachers in the classrooms, then we are not doing our job. So I'm going to repeat what my colleague Beth said, and that is show up, write to us, email us. I put out my information everywhere. So I'm gonna stop there because I don't think that Dr. Braxton has had a chance to talk, and I just look so forward to working with her on the state board.
Yes, I know, Dr. Braxton, I know you're at the airport, so I definitely want to make sure we get some time in with you. Thank you so, so much for joining, and we would love to hear your thoughts. I think just to kick us off, I'd love to touch on what someone dropped in our chat about this portal to report, DEI. What are we going to do to counter these initiatives? What are we going to do to make sure our students are protected and held safe?
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to be on this amazing panel discussion to talk about education and all things that concern us. I want folks to know first a little bit about the State Board of Education for those who may not know before I dive into answer your question about the DEI. The State Board of Education is considered the accountability on the North Star, if you will, for the Department of Education. There are 9 meetings, for example, this year, where the State Board of Education consists of 11 members, 4 of whom are elected and others who are appointed, come together to talk about things like the statewide plan for improvement of pupils, the read by grade 3, for example, English language arts standards. So there's a lot of framework discussion, a lot of standards, if you will. And so it's very important for listeners to know that piece. I can tell you with my campaign, and hopefully you guys can hear me. Can you guys hear me? Because I can barely hear myself. I'm getting over a cold. Okay, it's all good. We make things happen, right? Okay, so during the campaign, I realized that many people were not familiar with what the State Board of Education did, let alone the fact that there was a State Board of Education, all right? And so, it's important to not only be in a position to meet people where they're at. And what I'm talking about is having people amplify their voices. But there are different ways to do that, right? There are different concerns. So some might, want to come to meetings. I can tell you, please come to a State Board of Education meeting. Of the State Board of Education meetings I attended last year, it was the same folks over and over again because most of the attention was on our school board meetings. There are 17 counties. Each county has a school board doing very important work. The State Board of Education is also an avenue, right, to learn about what's going on as far as framework is concerned for our entire state. And so we have a State Board of Education. We have our 17 school districts. We have our charter school authorities, for example. We have our corrections positions as well. But showing up at the meetings is very important. And if you can't show up, right, that's okay. Listen in on some of the meetings. The meetings are recorded. Granted, they're 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock, so that doesn't work for everybody. Even if they were later, look, I was a single mom. Okay, so anything after school was very difficult for me to show up to. So because of that, I made it a point to go to different venues, and I call it amplifying youth voices, because I want to empower our next generation of voters. Right, we have midterm elections coming up in 2 years. Our preparation for 2 years from now starts now. Okay, the issues that we're discussing today, right, will be voted on again 2 years from now. So in January, I had an Amplifying Youth Voices event. I had students 17 to 26, that was my target, and mentors come to Chicken and Pickle in Henderson, because of the geographical hubs of information. Henderson is not one of them. Okay, so you got to go to where people are. We had a Saturday event where folks are able to talk about what concerns them. And of course, being an educator, I have a post survey. So I'm surveying what matters to our folks 17 to 26. That's my target. You got to get folks to vote, right? Because the apathy is real. I had another event with Nevada State University, right? And that was a wonderful opportunity for students to learn about Nellis and look at these films in our assembly and in our Senate. And when I have these events, I usually have special guests. So Dr. Sandra Cosgrove from CSN, which is me at Nevada State University, right? Because this conversation is very important. I can tell you that so far, the information that I've collected from these events is that people are very, very concerned about being deported and family members being deported. That's like a number one. And number two is the DEI space, those safe spaces for people to feel heard. And what's wild is that the discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's so intersectional. It's incredible. I mean, we can talk about people who benefit from our veterans, right? Our veterans and the benefits that our veterans receive. That is a part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when we have issues like this, whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, or deportation, family planning, right? Ensuring that people know where to go to speak, to lend their experience or lend their story is extremely important, right? I want to ditto what Trustee Cavazos and Trustee Smith said about the numbers, right? The Kenny Glenn Center, Trustee Smith mentioned this, has an amazing report about education and where funding is going and what that looks like. And she's absolutely correct to say that, yeah, there are these 4 categories. And if you meet one category, right, you're not going to get the assistance that you need if your intersection goes toward the other categories for special education, for example, right? And so what does that look like? I say right now, it's going to be super important to get people engaged, to inform our youth, especially 17 to 26, to let folks know, there are avenues to tell your story. And not only tell your story, but, to do something, right? What does that resistance look like? It's unfortunate that with diversity, equity, and inclusion for our nation, the states that are going to suffer the most are the ones that are not going to have funding, right? Not going to have funding. So did they cut their nose to spite their face? Absolutely. Okay. Now, let me take a step back here because I have this nonpartisan position. But clearly, I appreciate all of the hard work that our Democratic friends in the Assembly and Senate have done to protect what we need protected in education. So can you guys still hear me? Okay.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
all right. So give me some questions because I don't want to rant and rattle off and you know.
You're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine. And I do understand that you're going to be boarding soon. So I just wanna go with the last question and you were touching on it a little bit, right? Is how can we make sure that we're advocating for that DEI with this active, portal to report DEI and any initiatives to protect our students and keep them safe?
Um, this is a very subjective issue, right? So, but it's almost like a witch hunt, reporting DEI. That's absolutely insane because we have uh, the discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It touches everyone, right? Everyone. And so, if we're talking about um, gender issues, I mean, you can go back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg fighting to make sure that women were able to use credit cards. Are we really rolling back that far? Yeah, we are, folks. Right? Um, there is this idea that anyone who a person might like or dislike can be reported for DEI practices. There was a seminar that I went to in oh gosh, I think this was Atlanta last year. And I had a colleague from Florida, and Moms for Liberty, that's where they began in Florida, right? And she pulled me aside and she was like, Trisha, listen, I have to be careful to make sure that no one in this audience mentions the three letters, says the three letters, records me saying the three letters, because I can be fired if this video gets back to my university, right? This is what we're dealing with right now. So I say, and Sue might know a little bit more about me than some of you guys because I'm always about, uh, doing the good work anyway. You don't want me to say diversity, equity, and inclusion? I'm going to do diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? That's my framework. That's how I think. And so the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, was done before it became a three-letter word. We know this. We can go back to James Baldwin when he talked about, being a Black American in 1967 and what that looked like. Okay, so we're going to do the work. The work needs to be done. You want to have an issue of semantics. You want to call it a potato, tomato, whatever you want to call it. I need to make sure that my children are protected. I have two daughters. Okay, age 2021. I have a nephew who's 14. Okay, I need to make sure they're protected. I need to make sure my friends' kids are protected. I need to make sure your friends are protected, your kids are protected, your grandkids are protected. Okay. So I'm not going to get caught up in semantics. I'm not. I can play. It'll be interesting if someone wants to play a game of semantics with me. Okay. Please. But, you know, the serious
I love
issue is that our kids are scared. They're scared that their safe places are going to be taken away. So we have to make sure those safe places exist anyway, right?
Thank you so, so, so much. I really, really, really appreciate you coming on and you're at the airport. I really appreciate all of the insight you provided. This is a really important and robust conversation. It's gonna have to continue. Everything that we've talked about today has been recorded. So we're gonna definitely share that out and we are inviting anyone who wants to get further involved to be part of the fight, to be part of the action and the organizing, getting our communities informed and involved and keeping our kids safe. Please feel free to reach out to Sue and me. Sue provided her email earlier, so we're just going to copy that back into the chat, and make sure that if anyone wants to reach, yeah, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out, and we're going to make sure this conversation continues. Thank you so much to all of our guests and everyone that was able to stay on this far. It was a long call, but it was all very necessary and just a plethora of amazing information. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Braxton, for being on. Thank you so much, Trustee Cavazos, everyone on the call. Dr. Liz is here. Thank you all. Sue, back to you to just close us off.
Yeah, I was just gonna thank Dr. Braxton too. I could listen to her for hours. She is just a wealth of information, and this conversation isn't ending here. It's definitely not. Obviously, by the conversation that we've had, we're going to have to circle back and do it again as things progress or as things change and all of that. But I do thank you all. Linda, you are always delightful. We're going to be watching that superintendent search, and I believe Gina's going to go to the thing tomorrow. Debbie, you've got your walking papers for Washoe County, girl. You got it. Get your people together. But this is if Phyllis, please reach out. This isn't going to be an ongoing conversation. It is multi-layered. It is with tons of issues. And as Assemblymember Mosca said, it's all connected to Health and Human Services, which is also one of the bigger issues. So we will continue to have these conversations. And to repeat what Shanze said, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for being with us. I've learned a ton. I hope you all have too. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording.